Hi, Dolf de Roos here. Right now we're headed to downtown Provo in Utah. It's sort of the historic center of town, and we've got nothing particular in mind. We're just going to see what we can find. There might be buildings for sale. There might be buildings for lease. Sometimes you'll see a sign for sale or lease, and I love that because that's usually an indication that the owner can't find a tenant and they're desperate to get some money, and they're even willing to consider selling it. You know, as I understand it, a lot's happening in Provo at the moment, so we want to see is the trend to more restaurants or more commercial type space. And from that trend, you can usually figure out what your next move could be. So I'm kind of keen to see what's happening there. So clearly here we're in the historic district. There are some really, I think they're beautiful buildings from a particular era, and they attract a certain kind of tenant. Usually they cycle quite frequently because this is that part of town where restaurants come and go. So I think people eat out more, and therefore we have a lot more restaurants that we had. That's good for the owners of these properties. But, you know, it changes. These cycle around a lot. And I've been here to Provo several times, and there are Indian restaurants here and Korean restaurants and Japanese and Vietnamese and you name it, the whole lot. But every now and then you'll see something that's closed. This seems quite closed right now. I don't know if it is. Maybe it's only open at night. So they cycle through. But at the end of the day, the value of a commercial building, and I keep saying this, but it comes down to this all the time. The value of a commercial property is literally a multiple of its rental income. Technically, it is the rental income divided by the cap rate. Everyone's heard of a cap rate. Few people know exactly what it is. It sounds one of these weird, funny commercial terms. But cap rate is nothing special. It stands short for capitalization rate. It is literally the rate at which you capitalize the rental income to arrive at the value. So if cap rates are, say, 10%, and you've got 100,000 of income, then you divide the 100,000 by 10% to arrive at $1 million. In other words, you capitalize that 100,000 of rental income to arrive at the value of the building of $1 million. Another way of thinking of it is that investors are willing to spend $1 million to buy that 100,000 of rental income. Now, in a place that's a bit more popular, maybe Wall Street in New York or something like that, cap rates will be lower. And let's imagine that if instead of them being 10%, they're only 5%. When you divide that same 100,000 by 5%, you arrive at $2 million. So in places like that, investors are willing to spend $2 million to buy that 100,000 of rental income. But if you're in some podunk town in the middle of nowhere, cap rates might be 20%, which means, you know, they're not going to spend much at all. They're only going to spend $500,000 to buy that 100,000 of rental income to give them a 20% return. So the more desirable the property, the lower the cap rate. The less desirable, the higher the cap rate. And the other thing to keep in mind is that as the economy changes, right now people think we're headed into a recession. As we head into a recession, cap rates go up. Investors want a higher return because the economy is bad. But as the economy improves, then cap rates tend to come down. So another thing to look at doing is buy when cap rates are low, and then you might be caught out. But if you buy when they're high, you get a good return, and then market cap rates come down, the value of the building goes up. That's kind of a good scenario to be in. So the trick is when I walk around a city like this, is what are the trends? Is there increasing demand for a particular kind of building or decreasing? And the really interesting thing is we've been looking at this section of the street, which is sort of historic with lots of funky little premises there. But if you look across the road here, you've suddenly got this massive big commercial building, which is, I think, the headquarters of one of the big multi-level marketing companies. And it's completely different in its form and nature and structure to this. In fact, you could argue that this part of town would be better off if there were similar commercial buildings on the other side, but maybe there's not enough demand to sustain that. Obviously, a developer or maybe the owners of the business themselves thought this is a great location for them to be at. We're going to put this building in. Now, I don't know the name of the company here, and I don't know how many employees they have, but I imagine it's quite a few. So in a bizarre sense, I think all the employees that work there will probably fuel these businesses here. It may not provide all of their income, but I'm sure that they all have lunch, and when they finish work, some of them go home and cook a meal, and some of them think, hey, let's eat across the road, discuss something that's been going on at work or whatever. So these become a symbiotic relationship for each other. When you have buildings like this, it fuels a lot of other things. And on the corner, you can just see it there. There is a church. I've actually been to a wedding at that church, believe it or not. And that fuels a lot of other business, people who need snacks or things beforehand or afterhand. So all these things work in unison. And the trick when you go around looking at real estate is to see if there's an opportunity to create a rental income stream that may not have been before. We're going to have a walk now and see, I don't know if we'll find anything, but see if there's anything like that. I'll never forget one example where we came across a thrift store that was paying $12 a square foot, and they weren't doing that well. They didn't want to renew their lease, which was sort of a godsend. They didn't have a right of renewal, because we managed to put a coffee shop in there that was willing to pay $25 a foot. So we went from 12 to 25. That's more than a doubling. And therefore, according to this rule, that the value of a building is the rental income divided by the cap rate, the value more than double. And that's the sort of thing I look for, so that rather than just getting an 8 or 9% return year after year on the building, that we can get a massive step function increase in the value. If we can go from 100 to 200,000 of rental income and cap rates of 5%, then we go from 2 million to 4 million. It's that simple. You can do that in a day if you find the right building. So one thing I really like here is you've got stunning views of the mountains in the background, and despite today being relatively warm, there's still snow on the mountains here. There's a lot of springtime flowering going on. That makes it look really good. But one of the things I'm always aware of is when I see for lease signs, and on top of this 2-story building here on the corner, you can see a for lease sign. If there's too much available for lease, that would indicate to me that there's not much happening, and that's sort of a cautionary aspect you have to take into consideration. On the far corner, that looks as though that building has been vacant for a while. It looks a bit dilapidated and derelict. But I understand the Find Lab, which is on the ground floor, they've just acquired it, and they do film processing there, which sounds as though they're going to revamp that part of town. I happen to know a little bit about this corner because I know the operator of the pizza shop here. And at one stage, this whole block on the corner was available for sale, and it was in the multiples of millions, so it's not a cheap place. That's kind of a good thing. That shows there's a lot of demand going on here. But I want to check what vacancy rates are and what trends are. How long do restaurants tend to stay before maybe they get recycled out? These are all things that you can take into consideration to decide, is this a good deal or is it not a good deal? So right now as we speak, they're demolishing this building behind me, and it used to be the original council building or city building. The building, the newer one behind it that you can see, that is the current city building, city council. And I think it's plain to see that the council is really doing a lot here to help revamp downtown Provo. For instance, all these table and chairs here, they're not provided by the premises, they're provided by the city. So they're going to some effort to make this place look really good. And time will tell whether this booms or not. I think the population of Utah is increasing at the moment. There's a good chance that Provo will take off. And if that's the case, you want to be here at the beginning rather than at the tail end. So I would personally keep an eye on what's happening here, just with vacancy rates, with occupancy rates, the kind of business. Usually when an area goes down, you get a greater preponderance of pawn shops. Nothing wrong with that. I know in America there's a difference in pronunciation between P-A-W-N and P-O-R-N. Where I come from, they're pronounced kind of the same way. But I was referring to the P-A-W-N kind, the pawn shops. You get more of those. You get a few more liquor stores. You get a few more smoke shops, as they're called. That's the sort of indication that a place isn't perhaps going there. Well, nothing against the operator of those businesses per se, but in general, that's what's happening. Whereas when an area is up and coming, you get a better kind of restaurant. You get the more boutique-style restaurants, the French restaurant and the Italian restaurant, and more of these ethnic restaurants. So it's a matter of keeping an eye on all of that, and then monitoring prices, monitoring cap rates, just seeing what's happening and knowing when to strike. And for me, it's an ongoing process. I come to Provo, I don't know, several times a year. I keep an eye out for things. My gut tells me that things are getting better. Things are improving. But whatever area you look in, keep an eye out for all those items. Look at vacancy rates and then decide whether or not it's time to strike and invest.